If you were to place yourself at the forefront of the late 1970s in the United States, you would find a multitude of truly diverse ways of thinking, and culture groups that truly stood out as refined in their own manner. It's like a high school with all your different cliques and your groups and whatnot. And just like high school, people took to aligning themselves with these groups as if they were forming an actualization of themselves. A black kid from the inner city might align himself with the Black Panther Party because he agrees with some of their sentiments. He'd start dressing different, he'd start acting different, and the next thing you know, he's completely aligned his ideals with the movement. The same way that a 17-year-old white girl from Pennsylvania might take to counterculture the same way. One late night with some Bob Dylan and LSD, and the next thing you know, she's on the bus on her way to Woodstock. These groups often found ways to homogenize the entire movement. And so, it would seem instead of having millions of people, you'd have one big collective that acts, thinks, and dresses the same way. This isn't a bash on the people who got involved in these sorts of groups or types of activism. It's more of a perception than anything else. In these collectives, their ideals developed over time by significant members evolving the narrative and ethos. The reason I wanted to draw on the comparison between the different groups is because I've noticed a pattern in their thinking. Or more accurately, a pattern in their thinking of all activism groups. Collective groups always have a split in their thinking. There's the prioritization of the individual. Then there's the prioritization of the collective group as a whole. Do we act for the individual or for the collective? A really poignant expression of this is the dichotomy between the means of activism, between counterculture, and black civil rights. But even though I'm explicitly citing these two movements, note that this can probably be present in any group you look at, whether the movement represents one side or the other, or whether the movement itself is divided by this question. A really well-formulated representation of black civil rights' take on this question can be seen in Ma Rainey's Black Bomb, originally a play by Augustus Winter. So the stance is pretty cut and dry. To advance the coloured man, which is the collective being referred to, every representative member has to act in a manner which benefits the movement as a whole. The philosophy as such is continued in MLK's 1967 I Have a Dream speech. So as you can see, the rhetoric drives home this notion that black civil rights movement encapsulates its entire alignment in the idea that the collective is acting as one. The complete opposite is probably directed by a movement such as counterculture, though most of the chanting and lyrics that encapsulate these periods of hippies, stoners and dropouts often sing of togetherness or oneness. It can't be avoided that the guiding notion of this movement was driven by the philosophy of otherness. Take for example Bob Dylan's All Along the Watchtower. The protagonists of the song that are central to the story are the Joker and the Thief. The two archetypes find themselves outside the norms of the society described. There are many here among us who feel that life is but a joke, while they stand at the front of the watchtower being exploited by the princes at the top, keeping to the view. So listening to the lyrics, it's easy to understand how one could sympathise with these characteristics and feel united under a banner of outsider or nonconformist. So in that regard, the counterculture movement was recognised by this echoing ethos. However, what splinters the movement once more is the focus on diverse experience of the individual, or what's commonly referred to as the snowflake mentality. This is probably the root of the fragmentation of the counterculture movement. Often the case, issues which appealed to the youth of the 1960s and 70s reached out to the collectives who aligned themselves with the counterculture movement. All these issues spoke to those that impacted the most, and so the entire movement often lent a hand in the effort of collective bargaining. Counterculture was the rise in feminism with voices of Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem. Counterculture was anti-Vietnam, with the strong activism from the student union groups. Counterculture was the cannabis legalization effort. Counterculture was the freedom for abortion with the Roe v. Wade. So the point being, where you supported one, you likely supported the others, though undoubtedly you more likely vocalised support for the cause which affected you the most, and hence furthering individuality in the movement. The difference to the black civil rights movement is pretty clear. The members of the collective had greater alignments in thinking, and so supported numerous different causes simultaneously and, more importantly, the same degree. Desegregation, police violence, black poverty, and black voting rights were all looked at the same degree of importance. This more consistent and homogeneous membership of the collective meant that the voice that represented them could be more immediate and parallel with their aims, consequently leading to more effective activism and collective bargaining. The only response I can think of against this point would be the divide in thinking between Northern and Southern African Americans, or big city versus Christian, which later manifested to the rise and support of black nationalist voices such as Malcolm X, who better represented the African American experience in cities such as New Jersey, Chicago, and Detroit that MLK often missed the mark on. But even then, there was a strong syncope in the motivation behind the causes, only a difference in the means of resolving them. So, to return to the main topic, the varying experiences and individuality of the counterculture movement allowed it to deal with a variety of issues that affected the collective, though this variety meant that they were figuratively spread thin when it came to constructing a singular encompassing representing voice. So it can be fair to conclude that the movement which focuses on the impersonal experience of the collective can better mobilize to resolve causes which affect it, whereas a movement which focuses more on the diversification of the individual experience of the collective will attract a further-reaching effect, though the strength may be significantly impinged by the need to agree with a wider audience. So in other words, it's easier to understand one voice in an echo than it is to hear 1,000 in a field.